At what point did you read this and go, oh, I have to direct this. I have to make this into a movie?
It was in 2014 that I read it off a recommendation of a friend, and I read it in one day and I was like, holy shit, this is just so beautiful. And I vividly saw what the movie could look like. So it just became undeniable that I had to pursue it. So I had a producer friend make sure that the rights were available, which to me was like insane because I was like, this is so undeniable. And then like I was working on a spec script. I reached out to the author in 2016. I wrote him a letter and he replied. And then a couple of months later, he invited me to come to El Paso. And we spent 4 days together, like immersed in Ari and Dante's story and places. And at the end of that trip, he told me these boys were mine and now I give them to you.
Welcome to More Than a Movie, a podcast that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at your favorite movies. I'm your host, Alex Fumero. Last season, we did a deep dive on American Me. This season, I'll focus on a different movie each episode, feature interviews with the biggest actors, directors, writers, and producers behind them, and tap into the history of Latinos in film. The stories you hear about people coming to Hollywood with the goal of making their dream movie, who just grind it out and will that project into existence off their sheer hard work and tenacity, and then have that movie premiere on the big screen, well, those stories are bullshit. Mostly. Except if your name is H. Alberto. H is by no means an overnight success, but she did make her dreams come true, mostly with a laser focus, an obsession, to adapt the novel Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alida Sainz as a feature film, her first feature film as a director. Lots of people write books claiming to have the cheat code to making it as a filmmaker, but she actually did it. So how? Today on More Than a Movie, we find out how H. Alberto, and only H. Alberto, discovered the secrets of the movie universe to make her debut film a dream come true. H. Alberto.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome to More Than a Movie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we full disclosure, we know each other.
From a very long time ago.
Because you are from Miami.
Yes.
And everyone from Miami who leaves Miami
knows each other.
Right.
But we met in Miami.
We met in Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bring up Miami because your film, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, that movie that you directed and executive produced, is set in El Paso, Texas. Not, in some ways, very dissimilar from Miami, but I imagine in some ways you felt connected to that place for some reason.
I did.
Can you talk a little bit about why?
I felt, at least from reading the book, because it's based on a novel, there was like a surrealism to that place in my imagination that I feel like I don't experience with Miami. So I immediately felt some sort of escape in the magic of what it could be. And then when I went to visit, a lot of that was affirmed, but there was also this groundedness to it that I think Miami is void of as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
So there were so many things that, I don't know, just like inspired me about it. And it felt like undocumented. I feel like we never see movies or stories about that area. So there was so much that was alluring to me because it was not familiar.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of there are border movies that are about the border.
Correct.
But not a movie that just is set in a border town. But at the same time, I mean, I'm trying to think now about all the characters in the film, but it feels like at least all the principal characters, they're all Latino.
Everyone's Latino.
Everyone's Latino.
Yeah.
And that must have been familiar coming from a place like Miami where you're better off speaking Spanish than English.
100%.
When you were reading the novel, was part of what drew you to it the fact that these were Latino leads?
Oh, 100%, without a doubt. When I read the novel, it was Latinos through a very gentle lens, which was also unfamiliar and something that really spoke to me and unlocked something in me that I still can't explain.
What do you mean by that gentle lens?
I think a lot of our stories are so rooted in violence or trauma porn or this sort of regurgitation of a story we've seen over and over again. And this felt like this was people existing and it was very much rooted in love. which like when people ask the question, this is a Mexican story and you're Cuban, how are you able to tell this story? And it's like, sure, there's cultural differences, but I think what is similar amongst all of us is love and family. And so that's what I tried to like focus on.
It's so interesting that you're like, when people ask the question, because clearly they've asked. There's something funny about that to me. I mean, I understand it conceptually, but if it's like, if you told me like a Mexican director was going to tell a Cuban story, I wouldn't be too worried about it, because while our cultures are different, you can understand where the other person is coming from. When you were approaching, as a Cuban American, when you were approaching this Mexican family, what did it take for you to better understand the Mexican experience versus the Cuban experience?
I mean, I've been living in LA for so long, but it was really like listening to the author and like what his intent was of the novel, of what that experience was and what it meant to him, and like spending a lot of time at the border in El Paso to really just like honor that and respect that, but also knowing that I was going to bring my lens to the story. And again, it was like rooting it. What's the commonality amongst all of us? It's love, and like that transcends culture. And so that was my focus. So I never really thought about it too much. Once I like felt like I did that work and felt like I was firmly rooted in what this story was about.
Talk to me a little bit about your lens. I'm asking in sort of a broader way, I want to know why this book, but just in general, what are the types of stories that you're attracted to and why?
I really love to say that I'm attracted to stories that are grounded in reality, but where magic is possible. And I think that could manifest in so many different ways, right? And I think like State of the World, like my own experience, I'm really gravitating to stories that have some sort of hope, that are fully about the celebration of our greatest asset, which I think is love, or the exploration of love and fear, which is, I think, the only two options we have on a daily basis. And I think this story played against so many tropes when it comes to Latino, when it comes to queerness, when it comes to all of these things that we've seen lensed by other people that are not of that experience. So it was really about celebrating the authenticity of what that is.
And how much of the book and the story and the love story between Aristotle and Dante, how much of that did you identify with personally based on the way you grew up? Did you have a Dante or an Aristotle? Did you see yourself in both of them? What connections did you make to your own life?
I mean, that's such a loaded question, because I think we all have an Aristotle and Dante.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And so whatever that gender is, or whatever, however that looks in your experience.
No, of course. And I mean it more in that, like, as I was watching, I don't, whatever, spoiler alert, but, as I'm watching Aristotle finally kind of come into his own and go out and defend Dante, it, part of me was like, everyone should have an Aristotle. You know what I mean? Like in that moment, And so it could be you see both of them, but I'm curious if there was like, if either of them reminded you of people in your own life or.
Sure. Yeah. I think it was like at the beginning of the story, I like to ask the question, are you an Aristotle or are you a Dante? And I think for so long I thought I was a Dante. I think there was like a denial of truth in that. But like at the end, like of, I transitioned through the experience of this book. And in the reality of that, I was like, oh, I'm really like an Aristotle, which is like allowing yourself to see the love around you and fully embracing that, right? So yes, I think we are both of them, and we lean towards one or the other. And sometimes we like grow into a version of either or, because like within the story, they also like have this like switch in dynamics and in perspectives, because the world kind of tends to push you in one direction or the other.
Totally. One of them sort of starts already at a young age, fairly cynical about the world. Mm-hmm. Aristotle, not in any small part because of this sort of mystery involving his brother and who has gone away to prison, we find out, but we're not exactly sure why initially. And Dante, who's like this beam of positivity. In fact, like one of the most important moments in the film, Dante goes to save a baby bird that's like in the rain. Like you don't get more like
naive.
Yeah, and like starry-eyed and just like, we must save everything kind of thing. And then Aristotle really ends up saving him. When you look at the journey of those two characters and you're tracking it in the film itself, how do you approach directing? I mean, these are great young actors that you found, but how do you approach sort of directing those arcs with these two young people who I imagine, needed a fair amount of guidance.
Yeah, I mean, this was their first starring roles as actors, but I think they really stepped it up. And it was about finding two actors that were the essence of these characters. And then my job was like nurturing a safe space where they trusted me and they allowed themselves to be vulnerable with me, the camera, and each other. But that was something that really spoke to me within the story, was this juxtaposition of these two families from very different experiences as Latinos, and how our families are able to influence how we see and exist within the world, which I think is also a really beautiful sort of like subtle part of what the story is about. Because I think Aristotle has that, a lot of is self-imposed, but, his family has gone through different experiences than what, Dante's family has. And that's weighs heavy on like you as a young person.
Well, to ask you a version of the question you like to ask yourself, right? Like, I do love that you have this more like kind of, we'll call them like a traditional working class family. And then this a little more eclectic, eccentric, academic, intellectual, artsy type of family. Which are you, an Aristotle family or a Dante family? Like, how did you grow up?
I'm definitely an Aristotle family, maybe worse than that. My father was a cocaine cowboy in Miami, and he was a fugitive, and we lived on the run for 8 years, and movies were my escape during that process, which is not like an unfamiliar story when you're from Miami. So like that's another part of what spoke to me, because it's like for so many years I lived in a victimization and a darkness of my experience, like through my family that wasn't necessarily my own. And I think Aristotle's doing the same. He
internalizes his brother's sort of original sin as his own. How do you as a person, how did you go about revising that viewpoint in your own life? Like, how do you go from sort of blaming yourself for what your family goes through to like individuating from that?
I mean, therapy, in short, right. really helped.
Good answer. Yeah.
But stories like this, and like, that's why I'm so radically attracted to hopeful stories where we're like able to kind of like redefine what our experience is. And I think this is a real testament to that in so many ways.
So talking about that a little bit, I want to take a step back and talk about your first, and I know you've talked about this in other interviews, but talk about your first sort of interaction with this book and the eureka moment of, oh shit, this is, because, when we met, I don't remember if at that point you were already sort of thinking of yourself as a filmmaker. I knew you wanted to act, like a lot of us do. That's the way we get into stories. I'm also a recovering actor. But at what point did you read this and go, oh, I have to direct this. I have to make this into a movie?
It was in 2014 that I read it off a recommendation of a friend, and I read it in one day, and I was like, holy shit, this is just so beautiful. Like, and I vividly saw what the movie could look like. So it just became undeniable that I had to pursue it. But at that time, I didn't have representation. I was still acting. I had done a couple of short films, so I was already like venturing into this side of things. But I think I was still struggling to kind of like let the acting go. I just didn't know you could have a career as a writer and a director, especially someone like me. I didn't know that was an option. But something inside me at like an audition, I was like, holy shit, this is not at all what I've ever wanted it to do. I want to be on the other side of things, and I want to build story and tell stories. So this was like a real beginning to that, to like just pursue it as hard as I could. So I had a producer friend make sure that the rights were available, which to me was like insane, because I was like, this is so undeniable. And then,
that they were even available at all. Because usually these books, I mean, even in manuscript form, they're like people already optioning them.
And it was a really successful YA novel.
Right.
So it had won tons of awards. Ben had won a PEN Faulkner. Like, there was so much around it that I felt like someone would have scooped it up, which is so telling to like the state of Latino stories, especially at that time.
Right.
But
and let alone a Latino queer story. Yeah.
Exactly. There's so much to talk about when it comes to that. But and then like I was working on a spec script. I reached out to the author in 2016.
A spec script for this particular novel, right?
Which means like for free.
Nobody's paying you. You're going out on a limb. Yeah.
And I reached out to him. I wrote him a letter, and he replied. He was teaching at UTEP, which is University of Texas, El Paso. And then a couple of months later, he invited me to come to El Paso. And we spent 4 days together, like immersed in Ari and Dante's story and places. And at the end of that trip, he told me these boys were mine and now I give them to you.
Really?
Yeah.
Incredible.
We were both crying at a Mexican restaurant in Las Cruces. I cried for everything. But yeah, it was really beautiful. I had no idea what to do after that point.
I cry every time we break for commercial, which is now. We'll be right back. Welcome back to More Than a Movie. I'm talking to director H. Alberto about why she had such an obsession with getting this particular film made. That's what I was sort of wanting to get to next, which is, a lot of what this podcast focuses on is precisely like the behind the scenes,
right.
And I too, was an actor and then wanted to produce different projects. None of those projects that I wanted to produce early in my career even exist anymore. Like they just didn't, they were sort of like ways to learn. Mm-hmm. But you found this thing that became your baby at the beginning. And then you're like, I'm going to do this thing. And then you actually get the rights to it. But that doesn't mean you know what to do next.
No
so
clue.
Then what do you do? How do you learn what to do next?
I had screened a couple of shorts at like different film festivals. So I had like a tiny network and I was like, do you know anyone that's like looking for this? And then I was connected to this producer named Valerie Stadler, who was working at Telemundo, had this Latino film division at the time, and they were looking for projects around it. But this didn't necessarily like fit into what they wanted.
Why? Why did it not fit?
I don't remember the reasons for it.
Oftentimes you don't get a reason. They're just like, it doesn't fit our mandate. And that's the end of the conversation. Right.
But she loved it. And it was like very serendipitous because she's like, I have this book on my desk. And I was like, well, hello,
That's
I think
wild.
In hindsight, like that division was going under and she was sort of protecting me. But we started working together. And sure enough, the division was going under. Her and I continued to work together. We started developing the script together. We got a lawyer. I started to meet with a lawyer with like advice from people. And I was like, oh, okay, like this makes sense. It was just like he was guiding me through the process, but also didn't want to paper anything because there was like a verbal agreement with the author. So we developed the script. It finally like starts feeling like a real movie. And through that process, I discovered how popular the book was and how it had been translated into like 30-something languages at the time. Now
what is that? When you say you discovered how popular it was, what does that look like?
The fandom that existed around, like the hundreds and thousands of YouTube videos from all over the world of people that were so deeply affected by this book and this story. There was people that had tattoos. I got into the Latino Screenwriting Project, which I'm not sure it exists anymore. And like fans started to discover that I had adapted the book. So I started gaining this like following online. And then I was like, Lin-Manuel Miranda, which I did the audiobook for it. And I was like, well, he is who he is. We should definitely get him involved in some capacity. And we sent in the script traditional route through managers and agents. Nothing came of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, nothing about this has been traditional. So I'm going to tweet at him. And I sent him
not even a DM, like a public tweet.
Public tweet, which was then like liked and supported by all of these kids that were following me, which helped it get seen by him. And 20 minutes later, he replied. 3 months later, he was in LA agreeing to be a producer on the film, which really started to change the trajectory of the film.
Does he make a tiny cameo in the film?
It's a tiny, tiny cameo.
The radio?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. He plays like, he just does the voice of like the wake up alarm, basically.
He's not even credited.
I know. I like tried to look it up. But a very distinctive voice. So does that help you get the financing you need or not?
Yeah.
So what do you do next?
I mean, through all of that, even before Lynn was on, I was trying to meet with financiers or other producers before Val came on, or like to just join forces with Val. And there were suggestions of like change the race of these characters and make them Chinese so you could access Chinese
Oh, because that was the
Chinese
time.
money,
Yeah,
yes.
because there was like a time in Hollywood where they were like, how do we make it Chinese?
Yes.
They're like, yeah.
And I was like looking at this woman with cross-eyed, like, what are you talking about? I had to like fight everything inside me to not get Miami with it. So I obviously didn't listen to that. And then after Lynn came on, I had gotten into the screenwriting lab, the Sundance episodic lab.
Yeah, which is amazing. Like so hard to get into.
It's really hard. I had applied
Yeah.
like 100 times, but 6 times. But yeah, I finally got into it. And that started sort of unlocking me as a creative, and my profile started to like go up within the industry.
Right, because the other tricky thing, which is valid, it's a catch-22 that we all face, right? Like you haven't done something yet. So they don't want to take the risk because it is a huge risk to invest in a film. And so they're like, yeah, sure. First time writer director. Great. Let's do it. No, it's like a scary thing to do. So now you get into this lab, and what comes out of that?
I got my first TV job. I got representation out of it. Shortly before that, I had gotten my team together. There was another director attached to the project because it was at a point where I was like, I want this to get made. And if I have to sacrifice like me being at the helm of it, that's okay.
Who was that director? Can you say?
I mean, I could say, but I've never said. It was Miguel Arteta.
Miguel Arteta was attached?
Yeah.
I mean, that's significant, I think, because people might be thinking like, oh, why didn't you direct it from the beginning? But it's like, it's not just some so-and-so on a second movie. Like Miguel Arteta is like, I think one of the best like Latino directors out there. So you get this person attached who's hopefully going to get you the money
Correct.
to then get the film done. And then...
But I always knew, like, even when he was attached, I was like, this is not going to pan out. There's
Interesting.
just like something...
Like a gut feeling?
Gut feeling and intuition that I like always knew it was my story to tell.
Yeah.
So we went down the road with like a financier. That fell apart. So yeah, during that time, I was like, well, this is the opportunity for me to pitch myself as the director. So I had to like put a pitch together, and I pitched it to Lin-Manuel after Miguel stepped off, and he gave me the green light. And then we were off as me attached as a director. I had met Eva during this process, Eva Longoria, when they were looking for a writer to rewrite Flaming Hot. We really hit it off.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to work with her. Lynn had a really strong relationship with her. So we reached out. She came on, and then more people started taking it seriously. And then, long story short, it was pandemic. Eugenio Derbez's people approached us.
Yeah.
And he's who financed the movie.
Really?
Yeah, his attachment like really put it over the edge.
It's so interesting. You have two of the biggest Latino names in Hollywood. And this is also a common theme in this podcast. It's like how little power we still have proportionally, like massive buying power. But in Hollywood, it's like Lynn, Eva Longoria. Those are at this point household names. People underestimate. We're on the coasts also, but it's like Desperate Housewives was huge. And she has done, I mean, if you look at her IMDb, she has not stopped working her entire career. Talk about a force of nature. But this is, again, a person who struggled to get her own movie made after like a pretty extensive directing resume, right? Like in TV, fine, but like fully capable of directing a feature. And struggles even with the name. So you have these two people attached, still not enough to get to financing. Then you get Eugenio Derbez. And I think for those people in our audience who don't know who Eugenio Derbez is, like I would describe him as if you could combine the sort of power of Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler in their prime.
Yeah.
That is who Eugenio Derbez is for Mexico. So it took the combination of like an acculturated Mexican icon, an acculturated Puerto Rican icon, and then like, we'll just say an unacculturated Mexican icon to get the financing for the movie.
Yep.
So the financing comes together. And then how quickly after that were you shooting?
It moved pretty quickly. It was like maybe like 6 months after they had agreed. I was on another show for J.J. Abrams called Duster, which should be coming out soon on Max. And then I had to step off because we were about to start pre-production in 2021 in September. So I went to Hawaii for like 10 days before we started shooting. It took a little moment to like really sort of like ground myself in the reality of what was about to happen, because I had worked so hard to get to that point. It was like 7 years.
7 years.
To get the movie made. And then it's been 9 for it to be like on screen and in theaters.
So then you had still not directed a feature at that point.
No, I had only done short films, and I'd done this like experimental sort of like longer format film, but never a feature with like an actual crew and money.
Yeah, how do you
talent?
I mean, were you like, candidly, were you shitting yourself? Like,
not at all.
No, I would be shitting myself.
I was not at all shitting myself.
You were like, because it was this project.
I think that had a lot to do with it, because it had lived in me for so long and I was so prepared for it. But more than anything, I knew that I was going to surround myself around people that were smarter than me, more talented than me, and really good at their jobs, that were going to elevate my vision.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Like, who are those people and how is it that you approach them to be this kind of like supportive network, knowing that you're kind of a first timer going into this?
I think it was a testament to the story and the script. Everybody that I wanted participated.
So I want to get into the nuances of those types of dynamics when you are at once the general, right? The leader, the captain of the ship. People are looking to you to exude a certain amount of like, this fucking person better know what they're doing because they're in charge, right? And I'm new at this and I need people who are smarter than me around. How do you communicate? You know, I think one of the fears, I have this fear, I think a lot of people have this fear. You know, I've always been taught like, just say yes and figure it out. I don't want this person to think I don't know what I'm doing, but I do need to know. So like, it takes a level of humility, I guess is what I'm saying, and confidence. And how do you navigate that combination of, I need to convey confidence, but I need to also be humble enough to ask for what I need?
I was unafraid of saying I don't know. And I think anytime someone asked me a question, I said, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. What I did know, I said I knew. And what I didn't, I asked for help. And I think that was what I was very intentional about when stepping onto that set. And I think that's why I was like less afraid, because I was unafraid to say like, I have no idea, which I think made for people to be more willing to help and to know what their role was. It didn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But because I did have a really sure hand of what the vision was.
And you were very prepared and it was living in your bones. Yeah. It's not that. And that, again, like it's not that. It's that there are these moments.
They are.
You may not have been, but I think some people are terrified to say, no, don't know, because it's like you'll get caught. Especially, I think, people of color. I think Latinos, like, it's hard to find one of us that doesn't have some level of imposter syndrome. You know, you look around, you don't see a lot of yous around. You know?
I balk at that though.
Tell me.
I think I work really
pushback,
really hard at not leaning into that narrative. I work really hard to be in those spaces. And also my motto is to be in spaces, disrupt spaces that I supposedly don't belong in. So imposter syndrome, sure, it exists. But like, I also I externalize it and don't let it participate, which has really helped me.
You just tell the voice to shut the fuck up.
It's like, what are you doing here? Thank you so much. But no, like I sacrificed a lot. I worked a lot. Like no one did any favors to open the door for me.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of help and I'm humble enough to realize that. But also like walking into a space, I think like we shoot ourselves in the foot by being afraid of saying, I don't know. Because nobody knows what the fuck they're doing.
Right. And people who walk into a space with entitlement are actually not afraid to say they don't know because they know they belong there.
Well, I call it delusional confidence.
Yeah. Tell me about that. What's delusional confidence?
No one's going to be that voice that's like, you could do this. You should write this script. And sometimes you need to find that within yourself, which becomes, you know, quote unquote, a delusion, but then it becomes real because you're actually like applying it and doing it. It's the buddy that's like rooting you on that maybe doesn't exist in real life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so you're delusionally confident. You put together an all-star team. What about the steps to getting prepared to shoot? especially now that you're dealing with a cast? How do you didn't go to film school.
Mm-mm.
So where's the playbook coming from that, and how are you putting it together?
I think I've watched every director's roundtable, as much information as I could, every DGA interview. I taught myself how to write by like reading the script and watching the movie at the same time. Just like on my own, trying to do the work as much as possible and also trusting my intuition and my instincts. But yeah, I was like, well, how do you do this? I would like literally look up questions like, how do you talk to an actor? But I also had the experience of being an actor, which I think really helped in the way I was communicating with my cast. But yeah, it was, with every department, I spent a significant amount of time with a lot of visuals to help them see what I was thinking. So many lookbooks, like every department, I think had a different lookbook in so many ways. I allowed them to bring things to me. Like everybody had a voice. My directing style has been described as like firm but warm, which I think is a big compliment. So yeah, it was just about like over communicating what was in my head and then allowing the other person to have like creative freedom to bring something that maybe I hadn't thought about. So I think I was always leaving room for the other person's voice, which is maybe like a sort of defense mechanism of me not knowing what I'm doing.
I am also going to leave room for another person's voice. And that voice might be part of a really loud commercial. We'll be right back. And we're back with H. Alberto, and she's about to tell us the secrets of adapting a novel into a feature film. So, talking about the film a little bit, I haven't read the book, so I don't know how many things come from the book and how many are sort of your invention.
There's a lot that I wanted to honor in the book. I love the book. I'm a fan of the book. That was really hard to kind of let go what the book was because I thought his writing is so beautiful. It's the reason that I wanted to make the movie. So I think a lot of adaptations sort of veer off too far away from the source material. And that's what ruins movies based on things.
Well, that's where I was sort of also heading was, it sounds like you stayed pretty true.
Mostly, yeah.
To the source material. What elements did you bring to it that were just your own?
It took me a long time to get there, to sort of be like, oh, this is also mine. And I'm allowed to bring my own life experience to the story.
Because you venerated the story so much, it could feel like sacrilegious almost to like impose the original narrative onto it.
But like halfway through the process, maybe a little further along, I was just like, I let it go and I didn't look back at the book at all. So I was able to kind of like do away with things that maybe weren't working within the narrative and also bring in like my relationship through my tias is really, really special. She's prominent in the movie, whereas in the book, she's not. That New Year's Eve party is very much like my own experiences growing up in Miami and my uncles like asking me similar questions and it feeling like that vibrant. There was just like those nuances that felt very specific to me that I think added, certain layers to the story that maybe weren't innately there.
So I wanted to talk about the quote at the beginning of the film. It says, "To all of us who have learned to play by different rules." Is that an H original or is that from the book?
In the book, it says, "To all the boys who've had to play by different rules." But that doesn't necessarily speak to me. So I wanted to make sure that it was as inclusive as possible. And also to just let everybody know that this story is maybe about these two boys, but it really transcends that as well. And it's really cool to see how Latino, straight identifying men have responded to this story. Because it's like, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to sort of like redefine what masculinity could look like. So that's what that quote's about.
I think that comes through. I mean, there's a point in the film where I'm not even sure if Aristotle is gay.
Yeah. I don't think he is. He never says it.
I was going to ask you. He just loves Dante.
He just fell in love with Dante. I think that love transcends sexuality and gender. And I think that's what this story is about.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I part of me was like, oh, this could just as easily be like a story of allyship also.
Correct.
You know? But digging into that quote a little more, and forgive me if this is obvious, but I'd like to get a little obvious. Like, what are the rules that these characters no longer play by?
I think that when you're an other in the world, you have to figure out ways to survive in it. And that's always a different rule than what fits for everybody else. So on a daily basis, you're sort of reassessing that. You're reassessing what those rules are. So it's sort of making it okay that that's the perspective that you've been given. So that's what that quote's about. I think my rules change on a daily basis and they continue to change. I change, I grow. So yeah, and some people have it a little easier because like the rules that you're sort of given and that you're supposed to abide by are normalized. And when you don't realize that like there's a normal within your other, it could be really daunting and scary.
That's deep. All right. So now you've directed your first feature.
Yes, I can't. I mean, we haven't talked about how difficult it was to like stay true to what the story was intended to be and how financiers like really stifled that.
Oh my God. I would love to talk about that. Financiers got involved in what the...
Oh yeah, there were suggestions of reshoots for specifically for Eugenio's character to be disapproving. Yeah.
But is that a turn in the book?
No.
You inserted that turn?
No.
No, I mean, Eugenio, ultimately, his character says to his son,
I see you.
I see you.
Yeah, no.
That's in the book.
That's in the book.
So the financiers wanted you to make it cliche.
Correct. Yes.
Wow.
We got into a very prominent film festival. I was forced to pull the movie from that film festival.
No.
We were in competition in that film festival. And because they thought it wasn't ready. There was such a fight of God, even
though the festival said yes?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm sure you could fill in the blank on what festival that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. They forced me to pull it. They didn't think it was ready. And there was a fight to the death with this financier and I. This is the first time I'm talking about it, but like he would quote Harvey Weinstein as a point of pride. We were like shocked. And I've been so afraid to talk about it, but it's just like, that's a reality of what we faced and what made making this movie so difficult in post. It was really hard.
Did you reopen the film?
We reopened the film 3 times within the cut. And I compromised a lot in order to not have reshoots and in order for the movie to not be taken away from me and it be recut into something that it is. I watched the movie and I think it's like, there's a disjointed feeling of the vision of the film, of this like elevated sort of like, you know, YA movie versus like a YA movie that's like geared to Disney audiences.
There are moments in the film, now that you say that feel more lyrical, I guess. Yeah. You know, a lot of the stuff around the pool is like, I think, beautiful.
Thank you.
And then, these more intimate moments, specifically when Eugenio is like talking to his son, to Ari. But there are other moments that do feel more conventionally like YA.
Yeah.
And that was part of this compromise. You're not,
Yeah, it was part of these like cuts that I was forced to make.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is an interesting thing, again, sort of looking at the behind the scenes. So you had to go into this film without Final Cut as the director.
Yes, which is like common.
Which is common.
Yes. But I thought I was working with someone that knew what the vision of the film was and that was supportive of the film. Some of the notes that I got back were shocking and that I refused to say, that were like deeply homophobic. And it's like, wait, dude, what? Do you not know like what movie you've been making this entire time? It was really painful and really shocking to have had this beautiful experience on set and then have this very polarizing other experience with this man.
Wow.
Yeah.
This man was the primary financier?
He was like the face of the financier, yeah.
I understand. So now you look at the film and how do you feel about it?
It's hard to watch it.
There's
sometimes I'll watch it and I'll be like, okay, cool. But what it took to get there is really hard to watch because there's certain compromises that like I really didn't want to make. But in order to not have reshoots to tell a completely different story, which is the point of why I wanted to make this movie, you know, you kind of live with it and I'm okay. I'm okay now. And the response has been beautiful. And there's kids all over the world that have responded. They're getting tattoos of the film now. So like within the canon of the Ari and Dante world, fans love it. But I think the director's cut's better.
I hope we get to see that at some point.
Maybe, yeah.
Damn. And so you miss this festival.
Yep.
And then what happens when you do finally lock picture and it's time to find a release plan? Because that includes festivals and also wider distribution. So like, how does that play out?
We had our world premiere at TIFF, which was also really great.
Fantastic festival to premiere at.
Yeah, it was cool. I think it was also at a time in the industry where there was already that shift in how people were buying. Luckily, we got distribution. Small distributor named Blue Fox distributed the film. It was like in 500 and something screens across the country.
Which is so cool. And for an indie film, is actually a really wide release.
It's a really wide release for an indie film.
Like a regular film, you'd start at like 2,000 screens.
Correct.
And like an indie film, you could have, as low as like 2, but like, generally like 50 screens,
Yeah, we had an offer. It was like for 25 screens.
Yeah, exactly.
That fell apart. And then Blue Fox stepped in and gave it a wide release, but it was during the strike. This movie has gone through so much. It's always been up against something.
Well, it's not just this movie. I mean, it's part of unfortunately a wider trend. I had the opportunity to interview the director and the star of In the Summers, and they're facing a lot of similar challenges in terms of distribution. It sounds like they have something locked up now. They literally won Sundance, and then it's like, where's the movie?
And then the motto has also changed for distribution as of late.
Yeah.
Where it's like you have to figure out your own marketing budget.
Pretty much.
It's like crazy to me. So yes, it's specifically right now, it's definitely like challenging for indie filmmakers.
But so then, okay, it gets distribution.
Yeah.
It's well received by the audiences that you're especially interested in reaching.
It's also critically been well received.
It's critically acclaimed. And so now what? Like the film's come out, great reviews. Alberto, what do you want to do? What's next?
I'm attached to a couple of different projects.
Great.
I'm pitching right now. I'm working a lot in the television space.
Yeah.
As you know, like things are a little weird right now. So we're sort of like holding off on like taking things out unless there's like meaningful talent attached.
Because there is a looming potential other strike.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a waiting game right now, right?
Yeah.
But I'm working with a lot of really great producers. I'm working with Killer Films on a movie. We have some really beautiful talent stepping onto that. I'm more in like a genre space right now.
Cool.
I think the nicheness or how Hollywood niched this film really taught me a lot. And also the reality that like genre spaces are like far more expansive where you could, subvert certain things and really like attract a bigger audience to then really shift culture and have those conversations that I really want to have.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we did this.
I know. Thank you.
And I can't wait to do it for the next, you have to promise to come back for the next big genre
I'm
film.
always here. Yeah.
Good.
You invite me, I'll be here.
Don't forget about me when you're doing like subversive Marvel shit,
Please.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you, More Than Movie listeners. That's a wrap on season 2. If you're listening to this, I am honestly so grateful. I think at latest count, there were 55.6 trillion gazillion podcasts, and you chose to fill your time in the car, on the train, or not paying attention at work with mine. So thanks. And who knows, maybe we'll meet again. More Than a Movie Season 2 was produced by Chloe Tagliagambe with the help of Reynolds Gutierrez and Veronica Hernandez in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura Podcast Network. Hosted by me, Alex Fumero. Edited by Rose Reed and Chloe Tagliagambe with the help of Saida Quevedo. Executive producers are Carmen Graterol, Rose Reed, Isaac Lee, and me, Alex Fumero. Sound design by Gonzalo Messi. Original music by Golden Minds, Darko, and Iame. Recorded at JTB Studios and Vaudeville Sound. Our executive producers at iHeart are Giselle Bances and Arlene Santana. For more My Cultura podcasts, listen to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.